When Lord Cregan Stark arrived before King's Landing, the happy plans came crashing down. Cregan Stark was 23, but he was a man compared to the lads of the Trident. King's Landing had welcomed the River Lords with feasts and flowers and honors. Not so the Northmen. There were more of them, and came with a fierce repute. 2 years before, Lord Cregan made a promise to Prince Jacaerys. "The North remembers," Lord Stark declared. But the Sea Snake told him that the war was over. Cregan declared that he would destroy all who had supported the Greens. But Corlys had already sent envoys to Casterly Rock, Old Town, and Storm's End in order to negotiate peace. As the heads of these houses all died during the war, and their successors were too young to rule, the widows ruled in their stead. Cregan expected the terms to be rejected so the war could continue, because if the terms were accepted, attacking the former supporters of Aegon II would be considered as perjury and a breach of the king's peace. Afterwards, Lord Cregan Stark confronted Corlys. "Is that why you poisoned Aegon, my lord?" asked the Lord of Winterfell. Though Cregan Stark had no personal history with the Sea Snake for good or ill, he knew that Lord Corlys had served Rhaenyra as Queen's hand, that she had imprisoned him on suspicion of treason, that he had been freed by Aegon II and accepted a seat upon his council, only, it would seem, to help bring about his death by poison. "More wonder you are called the Sea Snake," Lord Stark went on. "You may slither this way and that way, but oh, your fangs are venomous. Aegon was an oath-breaker, a kinslayer and a usurper, yet still a king. When he would not heed your craven's counsel, you removed him as a craven would, dishonorably with poison. And now you shall answer for it." Then Stark's men burst into the council chambers, disarmed the guardsmen at the door, pulled the aged Sea Snake from his chair and dragged him to the dungeons. There he would soon be joined by Larys Strong the Clubfoot, Grand Maester Orwyle, Sir Perkin the Flea, and Septon Eustace, along with 100 others, both highborn and low, that Stark found cause to mistrust. Not even the lads were spared Lord Cregan's wrath, though they were ostensibly his allies. "Are you babes in swaddling clothes to be cozened by flowers and feasts and soft words?" Stark berated them. "Who told you the war was done? The Clubfoot, the Snake. Why, because they wish it done? Because you won your little victory in the mud? Wars end when the defeated bend the knee, and not before. You say you mean to marry the prince to the king's daughter, yet she remains at Storm's End, beyond your reach. So long as she remains free and unwed, what is to stop Baratheon's widow from crowning the girl queen as Aegon's heir? When Lord Tully protested that the Stormlanders were beaten and did not have the strength to field another army, Lord Cregan reminded them of the 3 envoys that Aegon II had sent across the narrow sea, any of whom might return upon the morrow with thousands of sellswords. Queen Rhaenyra had believed herself victorious after taking King's Landing, the Northmen said, and Aegon II thought that he had ended the war by feeding his sister to a dragon, yet the Queen's men had remained, even after the Queen herself was dead and Aegon is reduced to bones and ashes. The lads found themselves overmatched. Cowed, they gave way, and agreed to join their own power to Lord Stark's when he marched against Storm's End. Munkun says they did so willingly, convinced that the Wolf Lord had the right of it. Flush with victory, they wanted more, he writes in the True Telling. They hungered for more glory, for the fame that young men dream of that can only be won in battle. Mushroom takes a more cynical view and suggests that the young lordlings were simply terrified of Cregan Stark. The result was the same. The city was his to do with as he wished, Septon Eustace says. The Northmen had taken it without drawing a sword or loosing an arrow. Be they king's men or queen's men, stormlanders or seahorses, river lords or gutter knights, highborn or low, common soldiers deferred to him as if they had been born to his service. For 6 days, King's Landing trembled on the edge of a sword. In the pot shops and wine sinks of Flea Bottom, men placed wagers on how long the Clubfoot, the Sea Snake, the Flea, and the Dowager Queen would keep their heads. Rumors swept the city, one after the other. The mood of euphoria had vanished, once more, Fear ruled the city streets. A man who claimed to be the shepherd reborn rose up from the gutters, calling down destruction on the godless northerners. Though he looked nothing like the first shepherd, he had two hands for a start. Hundreds flocked to hear him speak. A brothel on the Street of Silk burned down when a quarrel over a certain whore between one of Lord Tully's men and one of Lord Stark's set off a bloody melee between their friends and brothers-in-arms. Even the highborn were not safe in the more unsavory parts of the city. On Dragonstone, young Alan Valerian was demanding the release of Lord Corlys and threatening to descend upon King's Landing with his ships if the old man was harmed. Other rumours claimed the Lannisters were on the march. The Hightowers were on the march. Sir Marston Waters had landed with 10,000 sellswords from Lys and Old Volantis. As armies marched and swords were sharpened, Lord Cregan Stark sat within the Red Keep conducting his inquiries into the murder of King Aegon II, even as he planned his campaign against the dead king's remaining supporters. Prince Aegon, meanwhile, found himself confined to Maegor's Holdfast, with no companions save the boy Gaemon Palehair. When the prince demanded to know why he was not free to come and go, Stark replied that it was for his own safety. "This city is a nest of vipers," Lord Cregan told him. "There are liars, turncloaks, and poisoners in this court who would murder you as quick as they did your uncle to secure their own power." When Aegon protested that Lord Corlys, Lord Larys, and Sir Perkin were friends, the Lord of Winterfell replied that false friends were more dangerous to a king than any foe, that the snake, the clubfoot, and the flea had saved him only to make use of him, so they might rule Westeros in his name. The seeds cast into the wind by Lord Corlys Velaryon during the false dawn had taken root and borne sweet fruit. One by one the ravens returned, bearing answers to the old man's peace offers. Casterly Rock was the first to respond. With the Red Kraken's longships still menacing their coasts, the Lannisters were more concerned with defending Case and retaking Fair Isle than with renewing the struggle for the Iron Throne. Lady Johanna agreed to all the Sea Snake's terms. She agreed as well to restore that portion of the royal treasury that Tywin Lannister had sent west for safekeeping, providing that Sir Tywin himself was granted pardon. In return, she asked only that the Iron Throne command Lord Greyjoy to crawl back to his islands. Lady Ellender soon agreed to terms. Still weak from her labour, she could not come to the city herself for the coronation, she wrote, but she would send her own Lord Father to do homage in her stead. They would be accompanied by Sir Willis Fell, together with his precious charge, the 8-year-old Princess Jaehaera. In Old Town, young Lord Lionel refused them at first, but in the end he was persuaded by Lady Samantha Tarly to accept them. Lord Cregan Stark found all his plans for war undone by the Three Widows. The Maiden of the Vale had arrived from Gulltown, bringing her own ward, the Lady Rhaena Targaryen, with a dragon on her shoulder. Lady Rhaena and her twin sister, Baela, became the darlings of the city overnight. Lord Stark could not confine them to the castle, as he had Prince Aegon, and he soon learned that he could not control them either. When they demanded to be allowed to see our beloved brother, Lady Arryn gave them her support, and the Wolf of Winterfell yielded. The false dawn had come and gone, and now the hour of the wolf was waning too. The situation and the city were both slipping from the hands of Cregan Stark. When Lord Leowyn Corbray and his brother arrived in King's Landing and joined the ruling council, adding their voices to those of Lady Arryn and the lads, the Wolf of Winterfell oft found himself at odds with all of them. Here and there throughout the realm, a few stubborn loyalists still flew Aegon II's golden dragon, but they were of little significance. The dance was done. The others all agreed. It was time to make the peace and set the realm to rights. On one point, Lord Cregan remained adamant, however. The king's killers must not go unpunished. Unworthy as King Aegon II might have been, his murder was high treason, and those responsible must answer for it. So fierce was his demeanour, so unyielding, that the others gave way before him. "Let it be on your head, Stark," Cementolli said. "I want no part of this, but I will not have it said that Riverrun stood in the way of justice." No lord had the right to put another lord to death, so it was first necessary for Prince Aegon to make Lord Stark the king's hand, with full authority to act in his name. This was done. Lord Cregan did all the rest, whilst the others stood aside. He did not presume to sit the Iron Throne, but on a simple wooden bench beneath it. One by one, the men suspected of having played a part in the poisoning of King Aegon II were brought before him. Septon Eustace was the first brought up, and the first released. There was no proof against him. Grand Maester Orwyle was less fortunate, for he had confessed, under torture, to having given the poison to the clubfoot. "My lord, I did not know what it was for," Orwyle protested. "Nor did you ask," Lord Stark replied. "You did not wish to know." The Grand Maester was judged to be complicit and sentenced to death. Sir Giles Belgrave was also put down for death. If he had not put the poison in the king's wine himself, he had allowed it to happen through carelessness or willful blindness. "No knight of the King's Guard should outlive his king when that king dies by violence," Stark declared. 3 of Belgrave's sworn brothers had been present at King Aegon's death and were similarly condemned, though their complicity in the plot could not be proved. 22 lesser personages were also found to have played some part in King Aegon's murder. His Grace's litter bearers were amongst them, along with the king's herald, the keeper of the royal wine cellars, and the serving man whose task it was to make certain the king's flagon was always full. All were marked down for death. So too were the men who had put the king's food taster, Ummet, to the sword, together with those responsible for cutting down Tom Tangletong and drowning his father in ale. Most of these were gutter knights, sellswords, masterless men-at-arms, and scum of the streets who had been granted their dubious knighthood by Sir Perkin the Flea during the turmoil. To a man, each of them insisted that they had been acting on Sir Perkin's orders. Of the Flea's own guilt there could be no doubt. "Once a turncloak, ever a turncloak," Lord Cregan said. "You rose up in rebellion against your lawful queen and helped drive her from this city to her death. Raised up your own squire in her place, then abandoned him to save your worthless hide. The realm will be a better place without you." When Sir Perkin protested that he had been pardoned for those crimes, Lord Stark replied, "Not by me." The last to face the judgment of the wolf were Larys Strong and Corlys Velaryon. Corlys did not attempt to deny his guilt. "What I did for the good of the realm," the old man said. "I would do the same again." The madness had to end. Lord Strong proved less forthcoming. Grand Maester Orwyle had testified that he gave the poison to his lordship, and Sir Perkin the Flea swore that he had been the clubfoot's man, acting entirely on his orders, but Lord Larys would neither confirm nor deny the accusations. When Lord Stark asked if he had anything to say in his own defence, he said only, "When was a wolf ever moved by words?" And thus Lord Cregan Stark, Hand of the Uncrowned King, declared the Lords Velaryon and Strong to be guilty of murder, regicide and high treason, and decreed that they must pay for their crimes with their lives. Larys Strong had always been a man who went his own way, kept his own counsel, and changed allegiances as other men changed cloaks. Once condemned, he stood friendless. Not a voice was raised in his defence. It was quite otherwise with Corlys Velaryon, however. The old sea snake had many friends and admirers. Even men who had fought against him during the dance spoke up for him now. When Lord Stark proved unyielding, some of them sought to circumvent him by appealing to Prince Aegon himself. Baelor and Rhaena reminded the prince that he would have lost an ear and perhaps more if Lord Corlys had not acted as he did. Aegon not only agreed to spare the sea snake, but went so far as to restore him to his offices and honours, including a place on the small council. To ensure the edict would stand, Alysanne Blackwood agreed to marry Cregan, and Lord Velaryon thus avoided trial. 19 of the remaining accused agreed to take the black, while only Lord Larys and Sir Giles accepted execution. Following the traditions of House Stark, Lord Cregan beheaded them both himself with ice, the Valyrian steel greatsword of the family. The heads of Lord Larys Strong and Sir Giles Belgrave were mounted on either side of the Red Keep's gates. The other condemned were returned to their cells to languish until arrangements could be made to send them to the wall. The final line in the history of the woeful reign of King Aegon II, Targaryen, had been written. Cregan Stark's brief service as the Hand of the Uncrowned King ended the next day when he returned his chain of office to Prince Aegon. He might easily have remained King's Hand for years, or even claimed the regency until young Aegon came of age, but the South held no interest for him. "The snows are falling in the north," he announced, "and my place is at Winterfell." Before he left, Cregan attended the wedding of Prince Aegon and Princess Jaehaera Targaryen. Plans were made for a lavish coronation and wedding. Guests came to King's Landing from throughout the Seven Kingdoms, the Free Cities, and even the Summer Isles. Tents and pavilions were raised outside of the capital, since the inns and stables within were full.
The day was cold but sunny, Septon Eustace records. It was the 7th day of the 7th moon of the 137th year after Aegon's conquest, a most auspicious date. The High Septon of Old Town performed the rites himself, and a deafening roar went up from the small folk when His High Holiness declared the prince and princess won. Tens of thousands packed the streets, cheering Aegon and Jaehaera as they were carried in an open litter up to the Red Keep, where the prince was crowned with a circlet of yellow gold, simple and unadorned, and proclaimed Aegon of House Targaryen, the third of his name, King of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, and Lord of the Seven Kingdoms. Aegon himself placed the crown upon the head of his child bride. Though a solemn boy, the new king was undeniably handsome, lean of face and form, with silver-white hair and purple eyes, whilst the queen was a beautiful child. The more observant made note of another absence. The dowager queen was nowhere to be seen, though as Jaehaera's grandmother, Alicent Hightower, ought to have been present.
As he was still but 10 years of age, the new king's first act was to name the men who would protect and defend him, and rule for him until he came of age. Sir Willis Fell, the sole survivor of the Kingsguard of King Viserys' time, was made Lord Commander of the White Swords, with Sir Marston Waters as his second. As both men were considered Greens, the remaining places in the Kingsguard were filled with Blacks. Sir Tywin Lannister, recently returned from Myr, was made Hand of the King, whilst Lord Leowyn Corbray was named Protector of the Realm. The former had been a Green, the latter a Black. Over them would sit a Council of Regency, consisting of Lady Jane Eyre of the Vale, Lord Corlys Velaryon of Driftmark, Lord Roland Westerling of the Crag, Lord Royce Caron of Nightsong, Lord Manfred Mouton of Maidenpool, Sir Torren Manderley of White Harbour, and Grand Maester Munkun, newly chosen by the Citadel to take up Grand Maester Orwyl's chain of office. This was a council of which Septon Eustace heartily approved. 6 strong men and 1 wise woman, 7 to rule us here on earth, as the 7 above rule all men from their heaven. Most observers seemed to feel that the reign of King Aegon III had begun on a hopeful note.